And today, a privilege to be in God's house with you and truly to look in His Word together as we continue to read through this great book of Nehemiah. It has been a really challenge to my heart, a challenge to my life. And nowhere am I more challenged than what we read and what we will see today in chapter 3. So we continue on. It is a message really today that's been preached to me all week long. And it's so simple. It really is. It's so clear. It's so easy. Yet it's so critical. And at the same time, it's such a difficult task that we are to do as we see the people of God doing in Nehemiah 3. So, it's not a complicated message today. It truly is a simple one. And I pray it preaches to you as it has to me. As we look back over the last, in chapter 1 even of the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah hears the news in verse 3 of chapter 1 that though God's people have returned to God's city of Jerusalem from the exile, they're in great affliction and reproach, and the city's walls and gates are broken down and destroyed. We've said that time and time again, but it's good to envision what Jerusalem might look like. It's good to be reminded of gates that are burnt with fire and of walls as big and huge and as long as it was lay in shambles. Well, there's this tragic news that completely changes the trajectory of Nehemiah's life that comes to him and his brothers from Jerusalem. Maybe you recall hearing some news in your own life that changes everything. There's good news. I can remember one time, the first time, 9 years ago, where Michelle came to me and said, "We're going to have a baby." That is news that changes your life completely. And there's bad news. We've all experienced something like this, where you hear your friend or your loved one say, "Well, the doctor came to me with a bad diagnosis." And that one bit of information changes everything about your life. Life won't be the same because of it. Well, this was the nature of the news that Nehemiah heard from his brothers that day from Jerusalem. And Nehemiah, too, would never be the same. His first response, as we read, it was to sit down, to weep, and to pray. And he prayed in an audacious way. Listen to what he said. He prayed to God, "God, you said this. In your word, you gave your people a promise." And he's asking God to do just that. What he'd promised, he would do. Well, God had said these words to his sinful people. God had said in chapter 1, verse 9, "If you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, I will gather you. I will bring you to the place that I've chosen to make my name dwell there." And Nehemiah believed God's promises. Yet he understood the facts currently back home in Jerusalem. And so he confessed his own sin and the sins of the people. And he asked for favor and success with King Artaxerxes. And in chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, he said this, and this was such a theme just a few weeks ago. "I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, These are some highlights of what we've read thus far. He prayed to God, and then he acted on the request that he prayed to God. What was his prayer? God, send me that I may rebuild those walls. Send me. I'm ready to go. The conclusion was in chapter 2, verse 8, that the king granted me. That was Artaxerxes, granted me according to the good hand of my God that was upon me. Yet God never promised things would be easy or comfortable. He never did. He never does. He tells us, in fact, to count the cost. And in chapter 2, verse 10, the enemies ominously are there in the background. And they lay waiting for Nehemiah in the region because they had heard that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Yet Nehemiah was not deterred, and he invited the people of God to come. Let us build together. That's what he said. And their response was immediate. And the people said, yes, let us rise up and build. You see, God's people were unified in that decision. Unity was already present. And we can see the hints of unity in the pronouns that they used. Nehemiah said, come, let us build. Nehemiah, as the governor of the city, was not one that would say, I'm here, living in this house, and I will make you do the work. No. Nehemiah said, let us do it together. What a leader. What an effective strategy. I mean, that strategy comes from God. That's what he calls us to do. Not to do it alone, but to do it together. You know, the people said, in an immediate response, let us do that. Let us rise up and rebuild. But isn't it true that it's so easy to say something, but it's another thing to do it? It is the very truth of our lives. You see, facing God's people was an enormous, nearly overwhelming task, a task ahead of them that had so many obstacles. The length of the wall, I mean, it was a big wall. It was a long wall. There's a lot of work to be done. That's an obstacle. The level of the destruction of this wall, from back in the times of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, I mean, it was a mess. The political climate about Jerusalem and Judea and this area was definitely an obstacle. Some of the people who had escaped being taken into exile nearly 150 years ago and had barely survived, yet being freed 70 years later, they struggled for what power and influence they could have. So even the Jews that were in some sort of control of the city, as Nehemiah would go into Jerusalem and find it, they had their own little bit of power, little bit of influence, and that's often not an easy thing to give up. Others were just downright enemies of Israel, enemies of God himself, and they had been for centuries. The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Sumerians, the Arabians, the Egyptians. The political climate was an obstacle. And so was this apparent vacuum of motivation. People were not motivated to do the work. There was a lack of leadership that was there. Yet with all of the obstacles that we read in chapter 2, verses 12, Nehemiah arose in the night. Verse 18, the people said, let us rise up. Nehemiah said to the enemies, we will arise. And even in our chapter today, in verse 1 of chapter 3, the high priest and his brothers rose up to build together. The Hebrew word is the same in all of these verses, and it's a strong word, meaning that they stood up, they got up, they confirmed and established what they had said. They didn't just say it. There was an action behind it. They arose up together, and they did the work of God. Despite the difficulties, the people strengthened their hands for the good work. And Nehemiah said at the close of chapter 2, God will make us prosper. Therefore, we, God's servants, will arise and build. So by faith in God and his promises, the people strengthened their hands and acted together in God's work. Faith without works is dead. That's what James tells us in the New Testament. But their faith, these people under Nehemiah, their faith wasn't a dead faith. Their works were the evidence of a living faith. They might have at times dreaded and feared. They may have doubted because of those obstacles. But their faith lay in a God who spoke the universe into existence. Just spoke the words, and there it was. They had a faith in a God who turned sea into dry ground. A God who would feed 5,000 and who told a crippled man laying at the sheep gate to get up and walk. And who, Jack and Leela, you'll remember this, a God in the middle of a scary boat ride. You remember that? That's what it was. He was in the middle of a scary boat ride, asleep in the back of the boat, but awakened by his disciples. And Jesus' response was to calm nature. He spoke, and the winds and seas obeyed him. That's the kind of God we serve today. Their faith was in a God who doesn't balk at obstacles. I listened this week in Cubbies at Awana. I was there with Calvin, yet another one of our many. And Kim Bowers and the helper she had were just doing an outstanding job. And they were singing, "My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do." And you know what? I was reminded that I need to learn that. We adults need to know that. We need reminded that when God does something, nothing can stand in his way. His purposes cannot and will not be thwarted. And building the wall in Nehemiah chapter 3 was just another instance of there's nothing that my God cannot do. You can remain seated this morning as I read chapter 3, a bit out of the usual things that we do, but it's a bit lengthy, and I also want to pause and draw your attention to a few things as we go. I hope you have a Bible in front of you or close to you that you can look at. But let me read to you this chapter, and we'll stop at different times and look at some specific things. I want you to really grasp what's going on here. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its doors. They consecrated it. That sanctified it, by the way. It is far as the Tower of the 100 and as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to him, the men of Jericho built. And next to them, Zaccur, the son of Imri, built. Keep an eye on those phrases, if you will. Next to him, next to them, after him, after them. Critically an important part of the chapter. The sons of Hassanah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, son of Meshezabel, repaired. And next to them, Zadok, the son of Baana, repaired. And next to them, the Tekoites repaired. But their nobles would not stoop to serve the Lord. Did you notice that? In the old version, it says that their nobles would not put their necks to the work. We know a lot as we read the New Testament about what stiff-necked people are, how they're hardened necks of pride. And here you've got a people like the Tekoites who would do the work, yet their nobles would say, no, that's below me. God save us from that sort of attitude. Joada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besadiah, repaired the gate of Yeshanah. They laid its beams and set its doors and bolts and its bars. And next to them repaired Melatiah, the Gibeonite, and Jadon, the Meronothite, the men of Gibeah and of Mizpah, the seat of the governor of the province beyond the river. Next to them, Uzziel, the son of Harhahah, goldsmiths repaired. Next to him, Hananiah, one of the perfumers, repaired. And they restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. You know, goldsmiths, what did they do? I mean, they would work with gold, right? Gold that had been refined, that had been separated from what was real and what was the dross. And what did perfumers or apothecaries do? Well, they mixed different things together so that together those things could be like medicines, like ointments, like perfumes that could help people. And to do that, so on one hand, you got a group of people that separated things to work with it. And on the other hand, you had people who put things together to work with it. In verse 9, next to them, Raphiah, the son of Hur, ruler of half of the district of Jerusalem, repaired. Next to them, Jedidiah, the son of Harumoth, repaired opposite his house. Many people would repair, as you will read on in this chapter, right next to their house because they had an invested interest. If we were repairing a wall around our city and there was part of that wall that was next to our house, it would make a lot of sense for Nehemiah to say, you build there, you repair there, because they knew their safety would depend on it. And next to him, Hattush, the son of Hashabniah, repaired. Malchijah, the son of Haram, and Hashab, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section. And the tower of the ovens. The ovens would be a tower on that part of the wall where people would really bake. They would bake like we do today in an oven there. And again, we take ingredients from everywhere and we put it together specifically. Now, I am very proud of my chili that I make, but I'll tell you, every time I do it, it's a little bit different. I know what I want to do, but I add a little bit more of that, a little bit less of that, and it always tastes a little bit different than maybe what it did before. Michelle says it's way too spicy, but she's a beginner. And I still do it time after time. I'm not a baker. Michelle is a baker, and here's what she says. You can't bake like you make chili. If you don't put it together in the right way, if you don't follow the recipe, it won't work. So again, you see these people who work with gold, these people who work with ointments and perfumes, these people who even bake breads, we're reminded of right here that all these things matter. Verse 12, next to him, Shallum, the son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, repaired. Notice this, he and his daughters. Now that's not unusual for the culture in which we live today, but it was very unusual for theirs at that time. Verse 13, Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They rebuilt it and set its doors and bolts and bars and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the dung gate. Malchijah, the son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakerem, repaired the dung gate. He rebuilt it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. Probably the not most sought after gate to repair, right? But he did it. And Shallum, the son of Kohazah, ruler of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He rebuilt it and covered it and set its doors, its bolts, and its bars. And he built the wall of the pool of Shelah of the king's garden as far as the stairs that go down from the city of David. After him, Nehemiah, this is not the Nehemiah that wrote the book. This is another Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, ruler of half of the district of Bethzur, repaired to the point opposite the tombs of David, as far as the artificial pool, and as far as the house of the mighty men. After him, Levites repaired. Rehum, the son of Bani, next to him, Hashabiah, the ruler of the half district of Keilah, repaired for his district. After him, their brothers repaired. Bavai, the son of Henadad, ruler of half of the district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, the son of Jeshua, ruler of Mizpah, repaired another section. You see that over and over again. Not everyone just built one, but they built other sections. They were going right in there. Done with their part, they'd leave, not just go home and rest. They go back and help somebody else just to get done, to finish the task at hand. So they had repaired another section opposite the ascent to the armory at the buttress. After him, Baruch, the son of Zabai, repaired. And again, that word is a little bit stronger word than repair. It means to earnestly repair. It is that he did it with zeal. Again, there are those in the room, when they're doing their work, they put their game face on, right? You've seen it. And people who are cooking or who are cleaning or who are doing whatever they're doing, the game face is on, and they are doing with zeal. Almost that seriousness, that angered kind of face, getting the job done. So he earnestly repaired another section from the buttress to the door of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. Verse 21, after him, Merimoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the door of the house of Eliashib to the end of the house of Eliashib. After him, the priests, the men of the surrounding area, that's the men of the plain, they repaired. After them, Benjamin and Hashub repaired opposite their house. After them, Azariah, the son of Messiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. After him, Ben-Ui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from the house of Azariah to the buttress and to the corner. Palal, the son of Uzai, repaired opposite the buttress and the house projecting from the upper house, the king at the court of the guard. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parosh, and the temple servants. We've read now about the high priest, the priest, the Levites, now the temple servants that lived on Ophel. That's an area that was bulging out. It must have been some sort of a geographic bulging out of the area of the wall. And they repaired there to a point opposite the water gate on the east and on the projecting tower. After him, the Tekoites. Here they come again, right? The Tekoites, remember, the people were doing the work, yet their nobles had stiff necks. Look at this. After him, the Tekoites repaired another section opposite the great projecting tower as far as the wall of Ophel. Above the horse gates, the priests repaired, each one opposite his own house. And then Zadok, the son of Immer, repaired opposite his own house. After him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper, that is the security officer, the one that was over, keeping, guarding that gate, the east gate, he repaired. After him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. After him, Meshullam, the son of Beruchiah, repaired opposite his chamber, and after him Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired as far as the house of the temple servants and of the merchants. Now we're adding merchants to the group. Opposite the muster gate, into the upper chamber of the corner, and between the upper chamber, verse 22, of the corner and the sheep gate. Once again, we've circled the entire city. We're back to the sheep gate, and the goldsmiths and merchants repaired. Not every goldsmith or every merchant was very trusted in the towns, right? There was opportunities to do wrong and to cheat and to not to be right. But you know who they worked right beside? The high priest back in verse 1. Because that's where we end chapter 3, verse 32, right back where we were, where we started in verse 1. It's a lot of reading, and I appreciate your patience in that. But so the work begins at the sheep gate in the northeast corner of the city, close to the temple, where lambs would enter for inspection. And if they were found without blemishes, they would be led to the priests who would sacrifice them. As I mentioned earlier, it is the opening scene of John 5, where Jesus walks by and inspects a multitude of people. They were blind, they were lame, they were paralyzed. People who were, in fact, blemished by sin. And he heals one of those who could not walk, and he tells the man afterwards, get this is Jesus speaking. He says, "My Father works until now, and I am working." Jesus had a work to do. And when he ascended, he left us, his church, his people, with a work to do. So at this very gate, this sheep gate, Nehemiah tells us that Eliashib, the high priest, and his brothers, the priests, rose up. There's that word again. He rose up to build it and to consecrate it, to set it apart. It is a picture of true leadership, setting an example of committing oneself to the Lord's work. Peter, the apostle, would later exhort elders to be examples to the flock. So, listen again to some of the words that we have read. The building and rebuilding, that is mostly found in the first 3 verses. But then we get to the repairing, which predominates the rest of the chapter. And to repair, interestingly enough, is the same word meaning to strengthen. They strengthened their hands so that they could strengthen the walls. And where did that strength come from? Back in chapter 1, verse 10, in the prayer that Nehemiah prayed, it was God's strong hand. Other words that are interesting, and I told you to look out for them. Next to him or them, after him or them, found over 30 times in just 32 verses. It means being next to someone means at his hand. They were right at each other's hands. They were present and accounted for, ready to do the work. And after him, meaning that they emphasized that they had their backs. They came after them. They could see each other, working along, caring for each other, taking good looks at what others were doing. They were working in unity. But they were not working alone. They worked together. Remember, we said another section or another piece. It's mentioned several times. Sometimes we are called to work on more than one ministry or more than one section of the wall. It's also interesting to note that in the first half of the chapter, all the gates seem to be the landmarks, where in the second half of the chapter, it's the houses that are used to describe the location. Either way, the work was orderly, and so was the description of the work. As Nehemiah begins at the sheep gate, he moves in a counterclockwise position or direction around the city until we, at the end of the chapter, arrive back where he started. Carefully and quickly notice the people that are described here: men and women, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, priests, Levites, assistants, and tradesmen like goldsmiths and perfumers, officials and commoners, keepers of the gates and merchants of the markets, those from the city itself and people from the surrounding towns, nobles who were willing to work, and also, as we saw in verse 5, some that weren't. Some who worked near the temple in all of its majesty and beauty, and others who took the demeaning, unpleasant jobs like the work at the dung gate. In the list, we have names of well-known people right alongside of others who we have no knowledge of whatsoever. Over 40 different groups. Every sphere of society represented. People from all walks of life. A real picture of diversity. People who differed so much, yet people who had so much in common. In fact, in Acts, God's people are described as having all things in common. Most notably, they had one common purpose, and that's the glory of God. They worked together, standing firm in one spirit, striving together with one mind, speaking together with one voice. All of those phrases are from the Apostle Paul, but that's the way they acted. That's the way these people worked. They worked together as a family of God, while sacrificing much together. They relied on God's promises together. They practiced those one another's that the Bible in the New Testament reminds us so often of. They were working out their salvation as they exercised themselves unto godliness, and they did it together. God's work is done by God's people, his family, who are to be sanctified from the world around them, because they are the ones we learned last week that do have a portion, that do have a right, that do have a claim to the heavenly city. They are, in fact, rightful citizens of God's city. Here in Nehemiah 3, we see a people who, in their own context, at this particular time in God's redemptive history, we see them act how the church is supposed to act. So we can learn so much from this. They stand forever as an example of what the church can be, a powerful and united force with a distinct purpose. Ordinary people working together for the glory of an extraordinary God. So the application, can it be more simple than this? Can it be more direct? It's so clear. God is building his church. He's building his family. He's building his city, which the writer of Hebrews said it was a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Before being stoned to death in Acts 7, Stephen preached this. He said, God does not dwell in temples made with hands. No, God is building a people. As Seth read earlier, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people with a purpose. And what is it? To show forth the praises of him who has called them out of darkness into his marvelous light. Well, what a purpose! That's the purpose we share today, together. Oh, it's a diverse family from every nation, from all tribes and tongues. John said it was a great multitude of ordinary people, just like you and me, who are invited and united together to do God's work. Last week we ended chapter 2 seeing clearly a picture of Christ and his mission. But here in chapter 3, we see just as clearly a picture of his church. Do you get that? The end of chapter 2, we get the picture of Christ. All of chapter 3, now we get a picture of his church, his body. And the applications are just as stunning here as they were there. In John 17, Jesus prays like this. He's praying for the unity of his body of believers. He's praying for the church, that they may be one. That they all may be one as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. That they also be one in us. Listen to Jesus say, that they may be made perfect or complete in one. But unity is not only a prayer, it's also an exhortation. Paul said to the Ephesians in chapter 4, I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner that's worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness and patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity. That's with zeal. That's game face on maintaining or keeping the unity, that we're to guard it. Keep the unity that you have. We don't create the unity, by the way. It's God's gift of grace that unites us. Our exhortation is to guard it and to keep it. But he finishes his thought later, Paul does in Ephesians 4. He says, rather, speaking the truth in love, here's what we're to do. Here's what you are to do. Here's what I'm to do. We're to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together. That's unity. By every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, that's diversity. And it makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. That's the goal. Building each other up, encouraging one another in love. In another classical text on unity and diversity, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 12, he says, for just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. And he goes on to talk about the parts of the body. And he says things like, the ear doesn't say to the eye, I don't have a need for you. And the eye doesn't say to the leg, you're not important. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but the parts rely on each other. They function together. God arranged the members in the body, Paul says. That's the unity, the members. Each one of them, that's the diversity, as he chose. That is, as it pleased him. Is that not a remarkable thought this morning? That God not only gifts us individually, but he allows us to come together as a body in Christ and tells us, makes us alert to what pleases him in placing us in whatever position he's done. It's an amazing thought. A diverse group of people, each with gifts given by God, working together in unity. James Boyce famously said this. Unfortunately, he said, many churches have it completely turned around. Today, many churches resemble a football game played in a large stadium. There are 80,000 spectators in the stand who badly need some exercise, and there are 22 men on the field who badly need some rest. There is so much in this rich chapter that we see. It's a striking picture of unity and diversity with many lessons for us to learn. It's just as interesting, though, what is not said in the chapter. What's omitted in the chapter? First of all, Nehemiah doesn't mention himself. Did you get that? I read all those names, mispronounced half of them, if not more. But not one time does Nehemiah mention himself. He was as humble as he was strong. That quiet strength, that meekness, Jacob. We've talked about that. Nehemiah doesn't mention himself. It's omitted. What else is omitted? Nehemiah does not mention the presence of not one professional wall builder. Not one time. We have no idea that any of these people knew what they were doing. He doesn't mention that. But you know what? Everybody got involved no matter how poorly he or she saw his or her own gifting. They got involved. So there they were. A broken, disgraced people living near or in a vulnerable, broken city. These people, though, were touched and moved and inspired by God's grace to unite under a leader for one purpose. I thought about it this week so often. Why did they do that? Why really did they do it? Why deny themselves? Choose to take up that cross and follow a mere cupbearer? Why would they do it? For the glory of their God. To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Can you picture that city? In your mind, can you picture those people? There they were. And here we are. Who could have imagined where gospel would be? 6 months ago, a year ago, I couldn't. Here we are sitting in a small gymnasium. We are in a Midwestern town. A diverse collection of sinners, right? A diverse collection of sinners touched and moved by the grace of God to unite under our leader, the Lord Jesus Christ, with one purpose. We too are looking for a city whose builder and maker is God. But until then, until when our eyes shall behold Him, we must work together for the glory of God and for the welfare of His people. And it brings up these final questions to consider. Are we willing to work together as a family? Are we willing to do the jobs that don't come with public recognition? To do even the unsavory work and not to say that's beneath me? Are we willing to sacrifice together? Are we willing to put our necks to the work and submit our necks to the yoke of Jesus, our only leader, and say, anywhere, anytime, any work, here I am, Lord. Send me. In the end, we're ordinary people working together for the glory of an extraordinary, awesome God. It is God's work. No other work comparable to this work. No other purpose more important than in this work. And we must work, Jesus said, while it is day, for the night cometh when no man shall work. There it is, that little time again that we have to make a difference. What a value, an eternal weight of glory that God has called us to do in His work. It is true, our God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. If He can take a people like me and you and bring glory to Himself, surely we can work together, striving to keep the unity in a wholehearted devotion for the work that He's called us to do. May God have mercy on us as the work continues right here at Gospel. Oh, may it please him to use us for his glory. Let's pray.